When our power-hungry HOA president illegally towed my motorcycle, she had no idea she just messed with the CEO of Harley-Davidson, setting off a chain of events that would expose years of neighborhood corruption. What would you do if you caught your HOA president pocketing thousands in illegal towing fees from your neighbors? Welcome to my channel. Comment below where you're watching from. The moment I pulled into my driveway after 3 weeks of secret meetings about my new role as CEO, I knew something was wrong. The sunset was painting the sky orange, but that wasn't what caught my eye. It was the even brighter orange paper flapping on my garage door. My heart sank as I got closer. This had to be Margaret Whitmore's doing. I'd only met our HOA president twice since moving in 6 months ago, but those meetings were enough to know she ran our neighborhood like her personal kingdom. The first time, she'd lectured me about my grass being half an inch too tall. The second time, she'd sent her husband to measure the exact distance between my mailbox and the curb. Pulling the notice off my door, my hand shook with frustration. Violation: unauthorized vehicle storage. Remove motorcycle within 48 hours or face immediate towing and fines. Below that, in Margaret's perfect handwriting, motorcycles reduce property values and attract an undesirable element to our community. I looked at my pristine 2023 Harley-Davidson Road Glide, which cost more than Margaret's luxury SUV. I'd spent countless weekends carefully washing and polishing it in my driveway, even helping neighborhood kids learn about motorcycle maintenance. Old Mr. Johnson from next door often brought his grandson over to admire it. Just then, Margaret Power walked past my house in her designer exercise outfit, her perfectly styled blonde hair barely moving. She didn't wave or stop, just gave my bike a pointed look and tapped her $500 smartwatch. The message was clear. Time was ticking. I wanted to run after her and explain that I wasn't just some random motorcycle enthusiast. I was about to be announced as the new CEO of Harley-Davidson. The press release was scheduled for next week, but something told me to wait and document everything instead. I took out my phone and started taking pictures of my bike, the notice, and the spotless condition of my property. As I was photographing the notice, my other neighbor, Tom Peterson, came out to water his lawn. He was Margaret's right-hand man on the HOA board, always backing up her ridiculous rules. "Shame about that bike," he called out, not sounding very sorry at all. "Rules are rules." I noticed his new tow truck parked in his driveway, the logo Peterson's Towing freshly painted on the side. That's when it clicked. This wasn't just about property values or community standards. Something else was going on here. Inside my house, I opened my laptop and pulled up our HOA documents. 3 hours and 2 cups of coffee later, I still couldn't find any bylaw specifically banning motorcycles. But I did find something interesting. Every vehicle towing in the past year had been done by Peterson's Towing, and the fees seemed suspiciously high. My phone buzzed with another HOA email. "Emergency board meeting tomorrow. Vehicle policy updates." The timing was too perfect to be coincidence. As I watched the sun set through my window, I saw Margaret and Tom talking in her driveway, both glancing toward my garage. I closed my laptop and smiled. They had no idea who they were dealing with, but they were about to find out. Sometimes the biggest mistakes come from judging a book by its cover, or in this case, judging a CEO by his motorcycle. I had 48 hours to stop them, and I already had a plan forming. The morning sun hadn't even risen when my security camera's alert woke me up. Through my bedroom window, I watched in shock as a blue tow truck backed into my driveway. My heart raced as I threw on clothes and ran downstairs, but by the time I got outside, my beloved Harley was already chained up and rolling away. The truck's logo caught my eye in the dim light: Peterson's Towing. I jumped in my car to follow, but the truck disappeared around a corner. My phone buzzed with a text from Margaret. Per HOA regulations, unauthorized vehicles have been removed. Office hours at 9 a.m. It was barely 6 a.m. She planned this. At exactly 9 a.m., I walked into the HOA office, trying to stay calm. Margaret sat behind her desk like a queen on her throne, wearing her signature pearl necklace and a smile that made my blood boil. Tom Peterson, my neighbor from 3 houses down, lounged in a corner chair, playing with his tow truck keys. "Mr. Z's," Margaret said, not even looking up from her computer. "I have your paperwork right here." She slid a folder across her desk. Inside was a copy of some HOA rule about recreational vehicles that I'd never seen before, highlighted in bright yellow. "This is ridiculous," I said, keeping my voice steady. "That bike is worth more than your annual salary. You can't just take it." Margaret finally looked up, adjusting her designer glasses. "Actually, we can. Article 7, Section 12 clearly states that no recreational vehicles may be stored in driveways. You were given notice." "A notice you put up while I was away on business," I replied. Tom snickered from his corner. "Rules are rules," Margaret said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "We take property values very seriously here. Some of us can't afford to live in neighborhoods with motorcycles everywhere." She said the word like it was dirty. What she didn't know was that I'd just been named CEO of Harley-Davidson. The news wouldn't go public for another week. Some final paperwork with the board was still being processed. I could have told her right then, watch her face change, but something told me to wait. "Where's my bike?" I asked instead. "Safe at Peterson's impound lot," Tom piped up. "Standard retrieval fee is $500. Cash only." He grinned, showing off teeth as white as Margaret's pearls. I pulled out my phone and started taking pictures of the documents. Margaret's smile flickered. "Photography isn't allowed in the office," she snapped. "Interesting rule," I said. "Is that written down somewhere too?" As I walked out, I heard them whispering. Looking back through the glass door, I saw Tom slip something into Margaret's desk drawer. That's when I noticed the security camera in the corner of their office. I had a feeling those tapes might show some interesting conversations. In my car, I looked closer at the paperwork. The HOA rule they quoted had a revision date from just last month. Strange timing. Even stranger, the tow company's address matched a property Tom Peterson had bought last year, right after becoming Margaret's special advisor for community enforcement. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Margaret. "Impound fees increase by $1,100 daily. Better hurry." I smiled, thinking about the press conference scheduled for next week. Sometimes the best revenge is just letting people dig their own holes. I just had to wait and watch Margaret and Tom dig a little deeper. I couldn't sleep that night, thinking about my missing bike. At 3 a.m., I started digging through the HOA website on my laptop. Something about that bylaw Margaret quoted didn't feel right. 20 minutes and 4 cups of coffee later, I found what I was looking for: a complete history of our HOA rules going back 15 years. My hand started shaking when I saw it. The motorcycle rule Margaret used? It was never actually approved by the board. She had simply added it to the website 3 months ago, right after Tom Peterson's towing company won the HOA contract. Speaking of Tom, I remembered something odd about his company's name: Peterson's Premium Towing Service, LLC. I pulled up the state business registry website. Tom's company was registered just 4 months ago. Even stranger, it shared an address with Margaret's personal real estate office. I dug deeper, pulling up every HOA financial record I could find. In the past 3 months, Peterson's Towing had been paid $47,000 for community services. That seemed like an awful lot of towing for our small neighborhood. My neighbor, Sarah Wu, who works at the county clerk's office, had mentioned that HOA records were public information. At 8 a.m. sharp, I was waiting outside her office. What she helped me find made my jaw drop. Margaret had changed our HOA's banking arrangement 6 months ago, moving all our accounts to a small bank where, guess who? Tom Peterson sat on the board of directors. But the real bombshell came when Sarah pulled up property records. Tom Peterson didn't just own the towing company. His wife owned the storage lot where they kept the towed vehicles. And the cherry on top? They were charging storage fees that were 3 times the legal limit under state law. I took a break to get some fresh air. That's when I saw them, Margaret and Tom, having lunch at the cafe across the street from the clerk's office. They were laughing, probably thinking they had me beat. Margaret was waving around a piece of paper that looked like another violation notice. Through the window, I could see Tom writing something in a small notebook. Back in the clerk's office, I found one last document that made everything click. Margaret had sent out a notice last week, announcing a new community improvement fee on all homeowners, supposedly to pay for better security. The amount? It exactly matched the inflated storage fees from Tom's company. I carefully packed up all the documents, making sure Sarah certified every copy. As I walked to my car, I spotted a familiar tow truck driving by, one of Tom's. The driver didn't recognize me, but I recognized him. It was Margaret's son, who she had claimed was away at college. I snapped a quick photo with my phone. That night, I sat in my home office, surrounded by papers and post-it notes, connecting all the dots. My phone buzzed, a text from Margaret. Hope you're not too upset about the bike. Just following the rules. Little did she know, I had just finished scanning all my evidence and sending it to my legal team at Harley-Davidson. The real question was, how would she look in orange? Because prison jumpsuits might be in her future. My hands were steady as I signed the certified letter revealing my identity as Harley-Davidson CEO. The timing wasn't perfect. We hadn't announced my position publicly yet. But Margaret's illegal towing scheme had pushed me too far. I'd spent the weekend gathering stories from other neighbors who'd lost vehicles to Peterson's towing. The Jacksons lost their vintage Mustang. The Garcias restored Triumph motorcycle disappeared while they were on vacation. Even old Mrs. Chin's grandson had his first car towed during a family dinner. Each story made my blood boil more, but I kept my cool. That's when my assistant, Maria, rushed into my home office with breaking news. Margaret was planning to auction off all the abandoned vehicles this weekend. My bike would be sold to the highest bidder unless I paid thousands in made-up fees. She'd sent the notice to my old business address, probably hoping I wouldn't see it in time. I pulled out my phone and dialed Ray Martinez, president of the State Motorcycle Rights Association. Ray, remember when I helped fight that unfair helmet law last year? I need a favor. Within an hour, my email was flooded with messages from motorcycle clubs across the state. They were furious about the HOA's discriminatory policies targeting bikes. Margaret's response to my letter came faster than I expected. A uniformed courier handed me an envelope containing a bill for $4,500 in towing and storage fees, along with a note written in her perfect cursive. Rules are rules, Mr. Zeitz. Payment required within 24 hours, or the vehicle will be considered abandoned. That's when I noticed something odd about the bill. The letterhead matched other documents I'd seen for Peterson's towing, but the bank account number was different. A quick search revealed it belonged to an LLC registered to Margaret's husband. They weren't just towing vehicles, they were running a full-scale scam. I stayed up late into the night building a case. Property records showed Margaret had bought 3 houses in her neighborhood for well below market value, all from families whose vehicles had been towed. The Garcias had moved away after the towing fees bankrupted them. The pattern was clear. Target, harass, collect fees, force sales. At midnight, my doorbell rang. It was Kevin Chun, Mrs. Chin's grandson. Mr. Zeitz, I work at the courthouse records department. You need to see this. He handed me a stack of papers showing dozens of vehicle auctions, all conducted without proper notice or permits. Margaret and Tom hadn't just taken my bike. They'd stolen millions in property from our neighbors over the years. I picked up my phone again, this time calling Jane Wong, our local news investigative reporter. Jane, remember, that tip I promised you about corruption in local housing? It's time. I also sent emails to every HOA board member, except Margaret and Tom, attaching evidence of their scheme. The storm was about to break. But first, I had a rally to plan. Just before dawn, I got an anonymous text. Auction moved up. Tomorrow, 9 a.m. They were trying to sell my bike before I could stop them. But as I watched the sun rise over our quiet streets, I smiled. Margaret had no idea what was coming. The rumble of engines in the distance told me the cavalry was already on its way. The showdown. Saturday morning dawned crisp and clear. As I sipped my coffee on the front porch, the quiet didn't last long. At exactly 8 a.m., the distant rumble of motorcycles broke through the peaceful suburban silence. Margaret was already outside in her pink bathrobe, watering her prized roses, when the first group of riders turned onto our street. They came in waves, cruisers, sport bikes, vintage models, all spotlessly maintained. The Veterans Motorcycle Club led the parade, followed by the Ladies of Chrome, the Classic Riders Association, and dozens more groups. Each rider wore a bright yellow vest with anti-discrimination rally printed on the back. I made sure every single bike met noise regulations and was street legal. Margaret's garden hose dropped to the ground as she watched hundreds of motorcycles fill every legal parking space on our streets. Her perfectly styled hair was still in curlers as she frantically dialed her phone. "Tom, Tom, get over here now," she screeched. But Tom Peterson was busy, dealing with the news van that had just pulled up in front of his towing company. I walked over to Margaret, keeping my voice calm and professional. "Beautiful morning for a community gathering, isn't it?" I said, handing her a thick envelope. Inside was a cease and desist letter from my legal team, along with photographs of every illegal tow her friend Tom had performed in the last year. "You can't do this," she sputtered, mascara running down her face. "This is a quiet neighborhood. We have rules." Just then, Mrs. Chun from across the street walked up with a tray of cookies. "Actually, Margaret, we checked the bylaws. There's nothing against organized community events." Behind her, the Rodriguez family was setting up a lemonade stand for the riders. Even old Mr. Johnson, who complained about everything, was in his garage showing off his restored 1950 Harley-Davidson to a group of amazed riders. Margaret's face turned purple as she saw more neighbors coming out to join the rally. The Williams kids were getting motorcycle safety lessons in the cul-de-sac from certified instructors I'd brought in. The Patels were photographing every bike for their son's school project about different types of engines. "I'm calling the police," Margaret threatened, her hand shaking as she dialed 911. I smiled and pointed to where Officer Rivera was already parked. He waved back, accepting a cookie from Mrs. Chun. "Already taken care of," I said. "We have all the proper permits. And speaking of police, they're very interested in those kickbacks you've been getting from Tom's towing company." The color drained from Margaret's face as she saw another vehicle pull up, a forensic accountant from the district attorney's office. She brought boxes of HOA financial records I'd subpoenaed last week. "This isn't over," Margaret hissed, turning to storm back into her house. But she stopped short. She saw what was parked in my driveway. My original Harley, returned and detailed, with a large sign reading, "Protected by the U.S. Constitution and the CEO of Harley-Davidson." As Margaret slammed her door, the sound was drowned out by hundreds of riders revving their engines in perfect unison. Mrs. Chun handed me a cookie and smiled. "Best Saturday morning ever," she said. I couldn't help but agree as I watched our neighborhood transform from a place of fear into a true community. The morning started with a single news van pulling up to cover our motorcycle rally. By noon, there were 5 different TV stations parked. Outside our community gates, I watched Margaret pacing in her front yard, phone pressed to her ear, as the first reporter approached me with a microphone. "Mr. Zeit, can you tell us about the HOA's towing practices?" the reporter asked. I smiled, reached into my briefcase, and pulled out a thick blue folder our forensic accountant had prepared. "I think these documents will interest you more than my motorcycle," I said, opening to the first page. "For the past 3 years, Peterson's Towing has removed 68 vehicles from our neighborhood. Strangely, every single one of those tows happened within 24 hours of residents questioning HOA fees." The reporter's eyes widened as she flipped through bank statements showing suspicious transfers between the HOA account and an offshore company. Tom Peterson, who'd been lurking behind his curtains, suddenly burst out of his house. "You can't prove anything," he shouted, but his face went pale when I pulled out more papers. "Actually, we can," I said calmly, showing the camera a series of checks. Every time a car was towed, half the fee went to a company called Urban Solutions. Guess who owns that company? Margaret Whitmore and Tom Peterson. More neighbors started coming outside, drawn by the commotion. Mrs. Chun from number 42 stepped forward, tears in her eyes. "They towed my son's car on Christmas Eve," she said into the microphone. "We had to pay $400 to get it back." That opened the floodgates. One by one, neighbors shared their stories. The Martinez family lost their work van. The Patels had their daughter's first car towed during her college graduation party. Each story matched a payment in our documents. Margaret finally emerged from her house, designer sunglasses hiding her eyes. "This is a misunderstanding," she announced, trying to sound confident. "As HOA president, I have a duty to maintain property values." "By stealing from your neighbors?" I asked, loud enough for everyone to hear. I held up a final document, a list of property sales. Interesting how many homes were sold at below market rates after their owners got hit with towing fees they couldn't pay. Even more interesting how many of those homes were bought by shell companies connected to you and Tom. The crowd grew silent. Margaret's sunglasses couldn't hide the sweat running down her face. Tom had disappeared back into his house. But I wasn't done yet. "I have one more thing to share," I said, pulling out my phone. On the screen was a security video from my garage, showing Margaret herself directing the tow truck to my bike at 6 a.m. The timestamp clearly showed it was before the 48-hour notice period had expired. As cameras rolled and neighbors watched, Margaret finally broke. "Fine," she screamed. "You people deserve it, with your tacky cars and motorcycles ruining our prestigious community." A police car pulled up quietly behind the news vans. Two officers stepped out, holding papers. I recognized them. They weren't just any officers, but members of the motorcycle club who had joined our rally. As they approached Margaret with search warrants, I turned back to the cameras. "This isn't just about a motorcycle anymore," I said. "It's about standing up to people who abuse their power. And it's about bringing a community together." Behind me, neighbors were already hugging and sharing stories, years of fear and suspicion melting away as Margaret's house of cards finally collapsed. The emergency HOA meeting. The morning of the emergency HOA meeting, I found a brown envelope on my doorstep. Inside were photos of Margaret and Tom at their secret monthly dinners with the towing company owners, along with receipts showing they'd been selling impounded vehicles without proper notice. My neighbor Jimmy, who worked at Peterson's Towing, had finally gathered the courage to expose everything. The community center was packed like never before. People were standing in the hallways, some even watching through the windows. As I walked to the front, Margaret tried to start her usual boring meeting routine. But this time was different. I held up my phone, showing everyone the security video of my bike being towed before the notice period expired. "Before we begin," I said calmly, "I think we need to talk about where all our towing fees really go." Margaret's face turned red as I showed the dinner photos on the big screen. Tom jumped up, shouting about privacy violations. But nobody was listening to him anymore. One by one, neighbors stood up to share their stories. Mrs. Garcia's son's bicycle, Mr. Thompson's restored Mustang, even old Mrs. Chin's gardening equipment, all mysteriously towed and sold without warning. Then came the big surprise. Our forensic accountant, Mr. Roberts, walked in with 3 boxes of documents. "Over the past 5 years," he announced, "Margaret and Tom have collected over $200,000 in unauthorized fees from our neighborhood." The room erupted in angry shouts. Margaret tried to grab her designer bag and run, but 2 police officers were already waiting at the door. I raised my hand for quiet. As your neighbor and as CEO of Harley-Davidson, I have a different vision for our community. The room fell silent. I unveiled plans for a new community program, free motorcycle safety courses for residents, a scholarship fund for young mechanics, and a monthly neighborhood bike show to bring everyone together. "This neighborhood doesn't need strict rules and secret deals," I said. "It needs community." The vote to remove Margaret and Tom was unanimous. As they were escorted out, I noticed something unexpected. People were smiling, talking to neighbors they'd never spoken to before. Mrs. Chun offered to teach gardening classes. Mr. Thompson volunteered his garage for basic car maintenance workshops. The Garcia kids started planning a bicycle repair club. 6 months later, today, our neighborhood looks different. The community center parking lot hosts motorcycle safety courses every weekend. Local kids learn about engines in our new workshop program. Even some of the former HOA board members ride motorcycles now. Properly parked, of course. Last week, I received a letter from Margaret's new neighborhood across town. She was complaining about motorcycle noise and asking for support. I sent back a Harley-Davidson catalog with a simple note. "Bikes still available at employee discount. See you." Because sometimes the best revenge isn't just winning. It's building something better from the wreckage of what your enemies try to destroy. A movement begins. 6 months after Margaret's departure, I received an unexpected email that made my morning coffee taste even sweeter. A neighborhood association from across town reached out. They'd heard about our story. Their HOA president, another Margaret type named Susan, had been doing the same thing with a different towing company. They wanted my help to fight back. I invited them to our newly renovated community center, where the walls now displayed photos of our neighborhood's transformation. The room was packed as I shared our story. But the real surprise came when Tom Peterson's son stepped forward, fighting back tears. He revealed a folder of documents showing that his father and Margaret had been running similar schemes in 3 other neighborhoods. The next day, I called an emergency meeting of Harley-Davidson's board. We decided to launch the Ride-Free, Live Fair initiative, creating a legal defense fund for homeowners facing HOA harassment nationwide. Our neighborhood became the pilot program, with our community center serving as the headquarters. The final twist, but the biggest shock, Margaret hadn't actually moved away. She had just shifted her operation to a retirement community in Florida. A resident there, a retired judge named Bill, recognized her from our viral news story and reached out. Within days, our legal team was helping them build a case. I got to personally deliver the news to our community during our first annual Neighborhood Unity Ride. Seeing hundreds of residents, from kids on bicycles to grandparents on trikes, parading through streets that Margaret once ruled with fear, it felt like everything had come full circle. The old storage shed where Margaret used to hold her secret HOA meetings, we turned it into a free motorcycle maintenance workshop for local youth. Every Saturday, I teach alongside former gang members who've become certified Harley mechanics, showing kids there's more than one way to be part of a community. A new legacy. Last week, I got a call from a national news network wanting to do a story about how one-toed motorcycle sparked a nationwide movement against HOA abuse. As I hung up the phone, I noticed a familiar tow truck driving past my house. But this time it had a new logo: Community First Towing. Protecting neighborhoods, not profits. Looking at my Harley gleaming in the driveway, I couldn't help but smile. Margaret's illegal towing scheme hadn't just taken my bike. It had shifted my entire perspective on what leadership means. Because sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest injustices. And the best revenge isn't about getting even. It's about making sure nobody else has to go through what you did. The information in this video is for informational and entertainment purposes only. HOA rules and laws vary by state and community.